Hey everyone, today we're going to be talking about the Canon RF 15-35mm versus the RF 14-35mm lens and which one you might want to get based off of your needs. So first things first, just so you guys know, I haven't actually used the 14-35mm L lens yet just because I haven't been able to get my hands on that, but that being said, I have and am currently shooting on the Canon RF 15-35mm lens. And I have a pretty good understanding of the differences, but I will update this review once I get my hands on the 14-35mm lens, just in case I find anything new from the actual hands-on experience, but I don't anticipate that being the case. Also, so you guys know, I am actually filming on the 15-35 f2.8 lens right now. This is a unique scenario because I wanted to try a new feature on my Atomos Ninja 5, and I am recording in 5K RAW right now. So definitely at first glance, a big reason why you might want to go with the 14-35mm L lens is that it is a lot smaller. It's a pretty noticeable size difference, as well as a noticeable weight difference too. The 15-35 is 840 grams versus the 14-35, which is 540 grams. I do think there's going to be a lot of landscape photographers who are backpacking who really want to carry around a lighter lens, because when you're backpacking and you're bringing camera gear, you want to be intentional about what you're bringing, because you don't want to add extra weight if it's not needed. The 14-35mm L lens also uses a 77mm filter thread, so that would be nice if you are using other lenses like the 24-105mm f4 lens, which also uses a 77mm filter thread. I believe the 70-200mm f4 lens also uses a 77mm filter thread. So if you already have some of those lenses that use that common filter thread, then it would be nice having that consistency between lenses where you can just use one circular polarizer or one or two ND filters between all of the lenses. Whereas if you bought the 15-35mm L lens, then you'd need to buy an 82mm filter thread. So, and those, especially the larger ones, they get more expensive. So it's something to think about. The price difference between the lenses is also pretty significant. The 14-35 is going to be $1,700 and the 15-35 is now $2,400. I think it used to be $2,300. I was lucky enough to get my copy before, the quarantine started, so I think I got my copy for $1,900 used. Yeah, it's a $700 difference, which is pretty big. So you're definitely gonna have to think about if that wider aperture is worth the money to you. In terms of performance for the autofocus speed and image stabilization, you're going to be getting pretty identical results. They both use the Nano USM autofocus system, and you get up to 7 stops of image stabilization if paired with the R6 or the R5 with both lenses. In terms of the minimum focus distance performance, you're going to be able to get a little bit closer with the 14-35, but it's not going to be anything that's super noticeable. Now, one thing I can't test out on the 14-35, since I've never used it before, is the performance wide open at the minimum focus distance. With the 15-35mm lens, if you are shooting at the closest focus distance wide open, then you are going to lose some of the sharpness and clarity, so it's best to stop the lens down a little bit if you are going to be shooting up close wide open with that lens. And I'm curious to see if that's the same case with the 14-35. Okay, so talking about the fact that the 14-35 has that extra millimeter where you can potentially fit more in the scene compared to the 15-35, I don't think it's going to be that much of a difference, considering that the 14-35mm has more vignetting, and that's natural optical vignetting, than the 15-35, so it's very noticeable if you're shooting raw, and you are going to have to correct that in post with either Lightroom or with Canon software. And while the 15-35 also has noticeable vignetting at the wider end when you're shooting wide open, it is not as noticeable as the 14-35. So I think after you correct that optical vignetting in post for the 14-35, the differences in the focal length range isn't going to be as noticeable. I think that people who might want to do more vlogging might benefit from having that smaller form factor of the 14-35mm lens. I've tried to vlog with the 15-35 and my arm ends up hurting pretty quickly just because the R5 paired with the 15-35 is a really heavy combo. It's not as bad if you put it on a gimbal, which, you know, in a lot of cases you might want to do because of the wobbling issue with the image stabilization. But that brings me to my next point, that you are going to have to be intentional about how you work around the image wobble stabilization issues with both of these lenses, because you get similar results at the wider end. So I did have a subscriber comment a potential fix for that, where you could put the camera in crop mode and then activate the image stabilization in the lens and the camera body, and you can work around that wobbling. I haven't tried it yet, but I might make a video about it if it works, so that's something that you could try. Otherwise, I'd just use a gimbal, or maybe if you have a Canon R, you could just utilize the 15-35 or 14-35mm lens on that body, and you won't get the wobbling because the Canon EOS R doesn't have in-body image stabilization. So my personal take on the 14-35 lens being smaller is that I do think that's awesome, but if I had the choice between both of the lenses, like if I owned both of the lenses and I was going on a backpacking trip or a travel trip, I'd probably still end up taking the larger f2.8 version, just because I like to have that option for a couple of reasons. And the first reason being that I like to do astrophotography or night shots, and having that wider aperture really allows me to get a cleaner image, especially for astrophotography. So that's the primary reason why I'd probably reach for the 15-35. But another reason is that both of these lenses have a really unique focal range and a really useful focal range, in that you can get these really wide landscape shots, but you can also get a very usable portrait lens, because you have access to that, 24mm to 35mm focal range within each of these lenses. So having that ability to really open up the aperture to f2.8 just gives you that extra creative option and low light option if you want to do portraiture with this lens. So I do think it's worth it spending the extra money if you are planning on doing portrait work with the 15-35mm. I can say from experience that having the f2.8 aperture has definitely helped out in a number of situations. For example, when I'm on my hiking and backpacking trips and I want to get lower light portraits or group shots of friends, then I can get that cleaner image because I have the option to go to f2.8 with the 15-35. Also, I've done video work with the 15-35, and having that option to get more of that background to subject separation with the 2.8 aperture is nice too. So yeah, let me know what you guys think about these two lenses, and if you've purchased either one of these, let me know which one you've gone with and why. And yeah, that's it for this video. I will talk to you on the next one. See ya.